Carl Oberholtzer received the James Madison Fellowship, Korean Studies Fellowship, and was recognized by Gilda Lehrman History Teacher as the Teacher of the Year in North Dakota.
Following Dr. Roberts is a daunting task. I've quite often shared the stage with him, but never followed him. And Eric, if there is a next time, put me later in the program. I'm really honored to be here. It's a beautiful building. It's a beautiful community. I'm looking out at the river right now, so if I get distracted, I'm thinking of my lake back home. But I am very pleased to be here. I would like to share my own personal background with you for a minute, just so you understand where my presentation is coming from. I did teach high school students for 35 years, and whether it was Hettinger or Wapton or Fargo North, when my name appeared, it said I was the history teacher. But I have to share with you my philosophy about teaching and what I told the parents in every parent-teacher conference, what I told the students at the beginning of every semester, and that is that I don't teach history. I use history to teach you to think. I use history to teach you to think. And I spent a long time, 35 years, attempting to use history to teach students to think about the world around them now. Last night there was an individual, and I don't know if she's here, an individual that said, how do I use this program, this Road to Little Rock program at Fort Totten? How do I use it there? On the surface, it's a video about 9 black students who had courage that challenged the existing system, and one courageous judge who made a ruling that definitely changed the education system in this country. And if we leave it at that, that's that. But there is much more to the story of the Road to Little Rock. We take that moment in history, that brief moment in 1957, and we use that to help our young people, whether they're in Fort Totten, whether they're in Fargo or Chicago, it doesn't matter. We use the lessons from that moment in history to help them deal with the world around them today. For any successful history lesson this week in this country, that lesson must be relevant. It has to be relevant to the students' lives. There has to be shown that we're not just talking about old dead guys in history. Terrence, you're still with us and we're glad. But it's not about just old people. There's lessons here. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to give you a brief overview of the events that unfolded, and for those of you that were there last night, I hope I'm not redundant and repetitious and so on, but I'm going to talk very briefly about the historical events. As I would with students, give them the content. And then I will, if you have any questions on the events that unfolded in Little Rock that we did not touch upon last night, or I don't touch upon today, I'll be glad to answer a few questions. And then the main part of my presentation today will be to show you how we use what happened in Little Rock at Fort Totten, in Bismarck, in Hettinger, in all corners of this country. And so that's what I hope to do today with you. So let me begin by giving you a brief historical background to Little Rock. As Dr. Roberts said, this country, educationally speaking, was segregated probably from the beginning in many parts of the country. So segregation in education was nothing new. It became constitutionally legal to segregate with the Plessy versus Ferguson case in the late 19th century. Supreme Court ruled that you can segregate as long as you have separate but equal facilities. And if my memory serves me right, it involved a train, a transportation on a train. And the Supreme Court basically said whether you're black or white, you bought a ticket to go from point A to point B. And the quality of the railroad car, whether it be one with plush seats that the white passengers had, or the cattle car with straw that the non-white passengers had, that's beside the point. The Supreme Court said, they're taking you from point A to point B. So separate but equal became the law of the land. And then in 1954, everything came crashing down on the surface. In the Brown versus the Board of Education case, you had a group of plaintiffs trying to enroll their students, black students, into the Topeka schools. And one of the overlooked lessons with that case is that, why is it called Brown versus the Board of Education? Well, somebody has to put their name on the case. And at that time, any male black individual that stood up to the existing system was risking occupation, if not life and limb. So in the Brown case, you had a lot of mothers that were willing to put their names on the cases, but one father. And thus, that tells us something, but it doesn't tell us the whole picture. Why couldn't the mothers put their names on the case? Because it would not go anywhere with a female name on the case. It wouldn't have gone through the courts. And so it had to be a male. So that's another civil rights issue from 1954. Well, the Brown case in 1954 opened the door. The Supreme Court said separate but equal is unconstitutional. And so now we have to, as school districts, integrate. Little Rock in 1957, in Little Rock, Arkansas, made the decision that they would, in fact, integrate their schools, despite what some would say, the supremacists, white supremacists, the segregationists, that this was some outside plot to destroy our way of life in Little Rock. This plan was devised by the school board of Little Rock, by the superintendent, Virgil Blossom. It was a very gradual plan. They would begin in 1957 with the high school, and then by 1961, the elementary schools would be integrated. And so the process began by simply inviting black students who were attending Horace Mann High School, junior high school, the black school in Little Rock, to sign up if you had the desire to attend the all-white Central High School. And I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of it, and I apologize for not having a slideshow. Central High School is a massive high school. Time magazine in the 1950s called it like the nicest high school in America. It covers 3 city blocks. It is still an operating school today. It is a national park site, and it still operates under a plan for desegregation in 2013. So Central High School is still there, but they invited these black students now who would like to attend. And so during the summer of 1957, 2 things were unfolding in Little Rock. One, the administration in Little Rock was preparing to enroll black students in the high school, but which black students? The common philosophy was that black students probably cannot stand up to the rigor of a white high school. So we need to select the cream of the crop. We have to make sure that these people that are going to come to our white school are able to do this. So there was interviews. There was checking grades, everything like that. And they were told that you will not. You will come to school in the morning. You will go home as soon as your last class is done. You will not take part in athletics. You will not take part in music and theater and drama and so on. You get to come to the classes and then you go home. But they were preparing for the integration of Central High School. Within Little Rock, there was another undercurrent going, and that was that there were groups that were bound and determined to prevent the integration of Central High School. And these groups were going to go to court to prevent the integration. One of the groups, called the Mothers League, Sounds like a wonderful group, the Mothers League. And the Mothers League was quoted in the paper quite often as saying that, you know, we're worried about our children, we want them to have the best education, there could be violence, and it'll interrupt our children's education. Well, the same group that was arguing that integration was being created by outsiders, northerners coming in, stirring up the pot and so on, ironically, the members of the Mothers League, very few of them had any children in Little Rock schools. They were the outsiders. They were the ones coming in trying to prevent this integration from taking place. And so the Mothers League then goes to court. They go to Arkansas State Court, and they ask for an injunction to stop the integration. And Governor Faubus, Governor Orville Faubus, the governor of Arkansas, testifies that if we do this, if you do have integration at Little Rock High School, there's going to be blood in the streets. And he gave interview after interview just going on about how this is going to destroy Little Rock schools. And the injunction was granted. And so what we really have in this scenario is it's a legal issue. Besides all the other social and political, it's a legal issue that we have a state court injunction that you cannot integrate, and we have a Supreme Court ruling that you have to. And so that is when Judge Ronald Davies comes in. And Judge Ronald Davies was a district judge in the 8th Circuit Court, which stretches from North Dakota to Arkansas. And Judge Davies, who had been sitting in Fargo, was asked to go to Little Rock and to help with an overload of cases. Last night at the movie, at the premiere, somebody asked, was there some behind-the-scenes workings here that Davies is going to be sent down there to change the world in the South? And we have no evidence. We have no evidence to support that. There's no documentation from Judge Davies' records or anyone else that he was sent with this intention to end segregation in the South. So Judge Davies ends up in Little Rock, and one of the very first cases on his docket is this injunction. And he looks at the case, and he as the video showed, he spent 4 minutes. And he said, well, you can't do that. You have a Supreme Court ruling stating this, and the state injunction, the state court's injunction is, it's wrong. And so Judge Davies simply says, you need to go with this program of integration. At that time, things begin to pick up, because the governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus, sends troops to Little Rock, sends the National Guard. We had the pleasure of speaking with a daughter of one of the soldiers and so on. But the National Guard shows up, and Judge Davies, in his documents, we know that he assumed that these soldiers were there to keep the peace. And they were there to protect. And what we found out was, on that very first day, when Dr. Roberts and 8 other black students showed up, the soldiers were there to prevent them from entering. And so at that point, the students go home, goes back to Judge Davies. Judge Davies then declares that the National Guard has overstepped their bounds. The National Guard is infringing on the rights of the black students, and they cannot be there. And Governor Faubus withdraws the National Guard, and once again, we think that the story is over. The Little Rock 9, they enter Central High School only to be rushed away before they ever start class, because the police, the local Little Rock police, are scared for their safety. And so they're still not in school. They're still not in school. And as this unfolds on TV, we see something that hasn't happened since Reconstruction. The President of the United States decides to live up to his responsibility. You see, within the 3 branches of the government, Congress is to make our laws, the courts are to interpret the laws, and the president, the executive branch, is to enforce the laws. And we have certainly had many rulings that the president's backed down from enforcing the laws. Eisenhower gives a speech. It's the little clip that's in the video. He says that he will enforce this law. He will support his judge, his federal judge in Little Rock. That clip that we show in the film was fascinating because we had the whole clip that we received from the Eisenhower Library. And in that clip, he starts off and he's just angry. He's angry he's had to come to the White House because he left his summer retreat. And I think where he was at that time was Rhode Island or someplace. He's just absolutely livid that he had to come to the White House. But he came to the White House because that's how mad he was that somebody was challenging one of the federal judges. And so Eisenhower sends in the 101st Airborne. As Dr. Roberts said, the Airborne, these soldiers, they escort the students to school on a daily basis for 170, 80, 90 days, whatever you had at that time. And finally, Little Rock Central High School is integrated. And that, in a nutshell, is the history. Now, we would share that with students, and we share that with you. But it doesn't mean too much to somebody at Fort Totten, or maybe in Maine, or maybe in Seattle, unless we make connections. And that's what I would like to show you, how we make connections to our lives today. But before I do that, are there any questions about the events that unfolded, historical events, on the activities that took place there? Are there any questions on that before I go on? Because I rushed through that. I know we had the video on it last night. None? Back there.
At what point or what year did they start integrating beyond the high school, down to the lower levels of school?
The plan was, well, the next year, and I'm going to talk about that later, the next year all the schools, public schools, were closed in Little Rock. It's called the Lost Year. In 1961, elementary schools were integrated. But the integration process went very slowly in the 60s, to say the least. And it wasn't until really 1970 that all the schools, students were encouraged to be in all activities and so on.
Reference about the integration is still happening in 2013. That was just a little bit comment. Could you comment a little more on that?
School districts, the teachers here, administrators know school districts have plans for everything. And the Little Rock School District still operates under a desegregation plan, which doesn't mean that they're segregated, but it means that they have programs trying to improve the culture within their schools. When we were down filming the video last summer in Little Rock, fascinating experience, 104 degrees, 90% humidity. Terrence, I don't know how you grew up in that. Anyway, it was, I was talking to a school member, school personnel, and they have on Fridays, they have Mix It Up Fridays. And Mix It Up Fridays means that on Friday, the blacks and white students should try to get together and have lunch together. You see, Little Rock, being in the climate they are in, they have a huge it's a massive school, absolutely massive. 3 or 4 Century high schools, 3 or 4 Bismarck high schools all in one building. And their cafeteria is massive. But right outside, the cafeteria has windows something like this, and right outside the cafeteria is a green area. And most of the black students eat inside, and the white students eat out in the grass area in 2013. So Mix It Up Friday is to try to encourage an integration. Now, Central High School, I don't want you to think that Central High School is this bad place. The students are incredibly successful. It's very diverse, and some of the things that come out of educationally, that come out of Central High School are amazing. But the culture obviously has not changed simply because 9 students entered the school in 1957.
Could you speak more about the lost year? Did they actually lock up that high school? And was it just Little Rock? And did parents send their kids to other communities to finish that year, or did kids simply just not go to school?
I'll answer that now. We're going to get to that in a little bit with the impact. But the last year, the schools were actually closed. If you can't segregate, then we won't have school. That was Governor Faubus's attitude. And so the schools were closed. The result, what I would do with high school students, I would ask them, so what's going to happen? And students would think through this, and they would realize somebody's going to go to school. Which students would still attend school next year, and where? And obviously, these would be the families that cared about education. And so you had families such as Dr. Roberts's that went to Los Angeles. And I think Carlotta went to Chicago or Detroit or someplace, one of the other Little Rock 9. Families moved out of Little Rock, large numbers of families. But the biggest new business in Little Rock was private schools. Private schools. And of course, without state testing and so on, anybody could open up a private school. There is Central High School there in the heart of Little Rock. And Dr. Roberts, what's the name of that private school that's maybe 2 miles away? Looks like a college campus. There is a private school today that it absolutely, well, looks like this campus here. So private schools became very, very popular. Today, I think 27% of the students in Little Rock attend private schools. Any other questions? Maybe 2 more.
What happened to Governor Faubus after all of this?
I would like to tell you that he was voted out of office, kicked out of the country, and all of that. He became incredibly successful. He wasn't that popular the first time he won the election, but he became more and more popular. He won several more elections, but I found out last night that he ended up not doing so well towards the end of his life. And I would use him once again with my high school students, that here was a clear example. He was a moderate concerning integration when he began his political career. He had no real interest it wasn't his agenda. And he jumped on the bandwagon. He followed the popular opinion. He saw an opportunity to get votes. And I know some politicians may look at that as a priority, but he became incredibly popular as a result of this, all across the South.
Did you have a question?
No other questions? Okay. So at this point, to answer the individual from Fort Totten last night, how do I use this? How do we use this? I look out at the room and I see people my age and around my age, and I see a few young people. We made this video, we made this movie and this curriculum for primarily students. But we think it applies to everyone in this country, in every corner of the country. It's the lessons from this moment that matter. And let me break the lessons down. First of all, politically. if I was talking to students in class today, the connections I would make, one connection to the 21st century. Here was a case that pitted the Supreme Court ruling, Brown versus the Board of Education, that said you must desegregate schools. Constitutional decision, and yet it went against public opinion. What issues do we have in 2013 where the courts have made decisions that really go against popular opinion? Is it gun control legislation? I remember when the last rulings came out, I remember hearing on the radio sheriffs saying, I'm not going to abide by this. I'm not going to enforce this. State politicians, we're not going to abide by this. The idea that the Supreme Court has the power to make a decision that is against popular opinion. That's a discussion I would have with the students. It's a discussion we should have today. Because what Judge Davies did was certainly not popular. What the Supreme Court did was not popular, but in their opinion, it was constitutional. Another discussion we would have that comes from Little Rock is the confrontation between a state level of government and a local level of government. The state of Arkansas stating that you aren't going to follow through on this desegregation plan. And the school district in Little Rock saying, but we have a plan. And ironically, the political party at that time in charge was the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party believed in individual rights in the South and the local control, and this big government shouldn't tell them what to do. I look at the state of North Dakota today and we see conflicts between the state level of government and local school districts. The lessons are there, the connections are there. The influence of public opinion on politicians, Governor Faubus, and we see that with perhaps our own Senator Heitkamp, who, as a Democrat, you would assume she would support the Obama agenda with some of these things, but she goes with the popular opinion in North Dakota, right or wrong, but it's a discussion we would have. It's a discussion we would have. The go slow approach that Little Rock was adopting, that we're going to integrate, but we're going to do this slowly. We can't make changes very quickly. And of course, we see the same thing with many social issues today. The economic connections that we could make between the 21st century and 1957, this change in education was an entire paradigm change, that before this, you would send your African American students to school, give them the separate but equal school, and we'll train them. We'll train them for vocational work. Once they are allowed into the white school, once they are allowed into that school to compete with white students, sooner or later, they will outscore the white students somewhere, somehow. Somebody is going to get into medical school, get into pharmacy school, become an engineer, a job that the white person had in the past. This was important to maintain the status quo, that blacks would do the vocational work. Blacks would do the work, the lower paying jobs. And once you allow blacks to enter the white school, incredible economic change. The changes economically that we could talk about in Little Rock to North Dakota to Fort Totten. Little Rock had one of the most vibrant black business communities in the South. A very vibrant black community in the South. Until they decided to build the interstate highway system. And of course, you can build that system anywhere. But it was built right through the black business district of Little Rock. It could have been built anywhere. So they destroyed systematically a very vibrant black part of the community. Can we connect that to North Dakota? Can we connect it to the building of Garrison Dam and the displacement of countless peoples in the 1950s? I think we can have that connection. I think we can have that dialogue. Economically, private schools became very popular in Little Rock and across the South. Economically, Little Rock was the loser. Loser, incredibly losing on talent, losing on businesses. No significant new businesses opened in Little Rock for 10 years following 1957. And many of the talented individuals did flee the city. These are discussions we can have with our students today. But perhaps the best discussion we would have with our students and with our communities today deal with the social impact, the social lessons, the social relevance of what happened there. 9 children. See, I taught this for 36 years, 35 years, and I'd say, well, we had these black kids that went to Little Rock. And it really wasn't until we put this together and we're sitting in Minnie Jean Brown's living room, her daughter's living room in Little Rock, Arkansas, when she woke me up. And she said, this is about children. 9 children simply wanted to achieve the best education they could achieve. And they faced daily harassment, death threats, physical abuse, mental abuse. We have a phrase for that today, child abuse. They faced child abuse on a daily basis. They faced more than bullying from classmates, but actual abuse from adults, death threats. And our nation tolerated it. And we said, well, that's too bad. That's too bad. That's a connection we can make with our children, whether they are in Fort Totten or in Fargo. It doesn't matter. This is a lesson. These 9 children, they were children. These 9 children demonstrated incredible courage, incredible determination. Those are lessons that I want my kids and my grandkids and my great-grandkids to know. That's how we connect the Little Rock to the contemporary times. Probably the most memorable moment I had with the making of the film was my last day in Little Rock last summer. I had the opportunity to meet Elizabeth Eckford. Now, Elizabeth Eckford is probably has the most iconic photo of this moment. She is very pretty teenage girl walking to school with books in her arms, sunglasses on, and white people screaming over her shoulder, hatred on their face. How many of you can picture that picture? It's in every textbook. It's the iconic photo of Little Rock. And I saw that for 35 years of teaching. And all the time I wondered what had to be going on in her mind. How could she do this? How could she go and do this? Because as a teacher, I would get notes from parents that my son or daughter can't come today, there's an issue. And I'm sure the issues were tough, but I would think of Elizabeth Eckford and I think, no one has an issue today compared to that. No one has an issue. Imagine walking to school, your first day of school, and having hundreds of people calling you every name in the book, threatening to kill you, spitting on you. I asked her, I said, Ms. Eckford, I said, you know, Carlotta Walls Lanier had just donated her clothes that she had worn that day to the Smithsonian. And I said, you know, your photo's so iconic. You had the sunglasses, you had a blouse, a skirt on. I said, millions of us can picture this. I said, whatever happened to your outfit? What did you do with it? She looked at me and she said, all I wanted to do that day was look pretty. All I wanted to do was look pretty. It was her first day of school. She's a teenage girl, and all she wanted to do was look pretty. Do you think your kids could identify with that? And your grandkids? She said, I got home, my skirt was so wet from spit, I threw it away and never wanted to see it again. That is the connection we can make with our students today. And yet the next day, or a couple weeks later, when the Army showed up, she went back. And she went back every day and demonstrated the courage and determination that every generation should learn. And the honorable way she approached school, and the other 8. Those are the lessons. Judge Davies, when we started this, I was called by one of the administrators in Fargo School, said, we need a little bio on Judge Davies for the opening of the high school. And I said, I can do that. You're going to pay me to write this? And they said, yes. So I wrote this little bio, and the next thing I know, they said, well, we're going to have some members of the Little Rock 9 come to the opening. Could you work up a symposium? And we had a symposium where we did a question and answer thing. And the next thing I know, we're making a movie. And the problem was, we were never making a documentary on Judge Davies. And I don't think Judge Davies would have wanted that from what I have read about him. He would want us to take his actions and the actions of the Little Rock 9 and teach our children to think about the world around them. And so with that, open to any questions. The curriculum, let me talk about the curriculum. Now, the curriculum will be sent out to every school in North Dakota, every school in Arkansas. We receive funding from both historical societies and foundations and so on. So the curriculum will be sent to schools in both states, and eventually we're hoping that the curriculum is sent to schools. I know it's going to some schools in Minnesota and so on. We have a DVD for the elementary, and a different one, a little bit different one for the secondary, and we have activities for both levels. Any questions?
We have about 4 or 5 minutes for questions.
What about the school board that made the decision to follow the federal ruling? Not much mention of that. And that obviously required a lot of courage on their part. Was that an elected board? And how did they survive this issue? And also then, what's the teaching moment related to that?
The school board, well, let me back up a little bit. Little Rock had actually been, I guess we would say, progressive in some ways, comparatively speaking. There was some integration of different functions of the city government and so on. So the school board wasn't doing anything that the city hadn't already seen. There were some areas of breaking the old barriers down. Now, it was going to be slow, and it certainly wasn't complete. But it wasn't like it was shocking. This was a process. They were elected officials. Following the closing of the schools, during the year, there was several groups that stood up for the school board, and groups obviously against them. The following year, there were groups within Little Rock that really became proactive in getting those schools back open. And I don't know what happened to the school board members, but I can tell you that Virgil Blossom, the superintendent, ended up in Texas and did some good things in Texas with schools there. Is it ready? Yep.
I have a question about, I remember when those, I'm old enough to remember when all this happened. But my question is, at that time we had about 160 million people in America. Now we have about double that, 320, which we have 2 countries population-wise. How does that influence the process of what you're talking about?
Well, I think it magnifies it. I think today, if we're truly going to live up to what is in the Constitution, which Stephen Breyer, Justice Breyer, stated in the video, if we're really going to live up to it, we must understand that we do have 300 and some million of us. And as far as history goes, this country is truly, we're in the experimental stage. We're 200 and some years old. We're not a very old country by historical standards. Our government is old, but our country is not. And I think it's a great experiment. What was undertaken as a result of the Enlightenment and other philosophical moments in history, that people are born with certain inalienable rights, that nobody can take these from you, and so on and so forth. I think it's so important that we make the connections from the struggles in the past to show the groups today. To socially, to tell a black student, for the courts to rule that a black student cannot be kept out of school was one thing. But then to actually have a president send soldiers and escort them in, that's carrying out the policy. So in the future, I see that our country needs this lesson. I know there's a lot of business people here probably, and President Obama and all the political experts and education experts say we need more math and science in our schools. And one time I was laid up for a little bit. I had some ankle surgery, and Obama had just been elected first time, and he had in his book, we need more math and science people teaching in our schools. We need our kids to be more successful. And I was mad at the world. My foot hurt really bad. So I took it out on President Obama, and I sent him a letter, which who knows who read it. I'm sure he didn't. But I said, we're missing it. We're missing it. We can train pharmacists. We can train engineers. I don't think we have one road not being built in a corner of this country because we don't have an engineer to build it. I don't think we have one pill that's not being made because we don't have a pharmacist to make it. But we don't have citizens that understand what is needed for a country as diverse as ours, that understand that if we're going to live up to what the Constitution says, we've got to teach the social studies. We have to teach citizenship. We have to teach those skills that allow us to work together. And I'll tell you, as a teacher, all the elementary teachers know this, if there's any in the room. They're under the gun that if their kids don't pass those math and science parts of the test, they're bad teachers. And I think math and science, they'll learn that. We need to teach kids this part of our history. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Carl.